So we have these like AI principles. So this is one way we've handled it, is that early on we published this is how we're going to handle AI. And in some cases, it's different from the way that other things work. So one of the principles is that the enterprise is in full control of their content and of the AI. So normally, if we have a new feature, we release it to our customers and we say, here you go. And then we release it to the users and they get a chance to try it. Just all normally good SaaS software. So it's like a benefit. It's a feature of this approach, which is that everybody gets to use it. But in the case of AI, even when we release it, we tell the admins to then go enable it for their users.
Welcome back to this week's episode of Unsolicited Feedback. I'm your host, Fareed Mosavat. This week, we had the pleasure of joining Ben Kus, CTO of Box, on the podcast. Ben is one of the few people building at scale with AI products at Box and has a lot of interesting and incredible thoughts about not just what the capabilities are with AI, but also the nuts and bolts of how to really build at scale. For part one, we riff on the recent launches from OpenAI with their GPT-4o omni-modal model that they launched this week, and compare and contrast that to Google's approach at I.O., where they launched a large number of products across a bunch of different pieces of their product strategy. We compare and contrast these different approaches. GPT and OpenAI launching really one thing that has some incredible and new capabilities versus Google's approach of integrating AI into every single piece of their product suite, starting with search, but all the way through to workplace and other video tools, maps, etc. And we talk about how these differences might result in a divergence of strategies for the two companies. We hope you enjoy this first part of our conversation. Let's dive right in.
It is super fun to have you on, and I'm excited to get to know you a little bit. We don't know each other super well yet, or at all, except for a couple of emails back and forth. So I would love to just start with a little bit about you and your background and how you got to be CTO of Box.
Sure. So if you asked, I would typically tell you that I'm a technologist, a computer scientist by heart. And then I joined a small company, which was in the sort of the dot-com days. And so I was an early employee there, grew up with the company. It's a company called Big Fix. We did enterprise security. And then we got acquired by IBM a little bit later. So I had a bunch of different roles there. I was a chief architect of mobile security at IBM for a while. And so this is during the big mobile push in the world. And then left IBM after a few years. I started a startup called Subspace because my background was in enterprise security. So I did a secure browser. So Subspace's job in life was to make the browser secure. I did that for a little while. And then actually Box acquired my company. And then I was in the product team for Box for a while, but always with the technology and where the platform meets the product. And then I became CTO a few years ago. And these days, most of my focus is on technologies that can really push Box forward. And in particular, of course, today, AI. But actually, to be honest, I'm happy to talk about any technology.
I love that. You work with one of the most prolific CEO Twitter personalities on the planet. Is he as funny in person as he is on the internet?
Yeah, it is. With Aaron, I think there's no like multiple Aarons. Aaron is just Aaron at all times. And he has that sense of, I think we're referring to as prolific is a good, just in all interactions. He's full of energy at all times, always pushing the boundaries across the board of like making things better, to spend more time on this, to improve it in different ways. Let's rethink these things. And so, to be honest, it's one of the things that many people enjoy about Box is that even though it's like a company, we have $1 billion in revenue now, we're sizable, we've been around for a while, but it definitely has that startup feel. And especially with some of the topics like we're talking about today with like AI, we always have this idea of, in order to continue to grow and to do better, we have to be always innovating. And that's just like our obligation to our customers and to our users. And that's just makes its way through the whole company. That's a very Aaron-like trait.
I love that. And he's had a lot of great things to say and thoughtful things that have inspired me around AI. But I would love to just dive in on this week, because this week is like big AI week in a lot of different ways. We had an OpenAI announcement on Monday. Short, sweet, focused. And we had Google I.O., which was the opposite. Huge production, tons of different releases, lots of craziness going on. I saw a clip of somebody running and screaming around the stage, some DJ. And I'm curious, as a technologist, as someone building in the space, what feedback do you have? What things are you excited about, interested in that have changed this week? I mean, one of the craziest things about this podcast is we're in an era where what we talk about has to change week to week. but with some common threads. So I'm curious, what are you excited about that you heard about this week?
Yeah. So for me, there's definitely these ongoing periods where you start to see like not only one company, but multiple companies start to offer like the next generation of technology. And for me, this week was really all about people really establishing some of the, not only like it's better, it's faster, it's cheaper, which are really critical because like a lot of companies have to be worried about making sure that it works well. But the idea of the multimodality where it's no longer just the idea of text-based models. It's now fully incorporated. So it's like GPT-4, there's GPT-4V for visual, and now it's GPT-4o for Omni, right? And so the idea of being able to use AI across different ways that people perceive things. And then now the AI can do that too. And you saw all these really interesting demonstrations of how to use that, even its most basic form, just a simple app that you can talk to, or the videos that you can walk around and it is able to, like, again, like a person, just keep track of what's going on and done in, I think, a very nice way. And so like you saw that from OpenAI, you saw that from Google, and then you can just see how people are from these companies are starting to innovate on the fundamentals of technology, but then also now it becomes available for everybody else in the world to use in many interesting ways. And so this is the week of multimodality in many ways.
Yeah. It was so interesting, the contrast between the two. I mean, obviously totally different companies, totally different approaches. And I thought OpenAI, you watched the video, I assume, of the OpenAI announcement. Something I like at first was like, ooh, this is feeling a little like live demo, like all of the things that happen in a startup live demo, little interruptions, things that don't quite work, actually became like the charm of it. Yeah. Like the charm of it was they announced one thing and they went for it live, which I honestly miss. There's not a lot of that, especially from larger established companies, people like doing live demos with 3 people on stage for 20 minutes and then boom, we're done. I was impressed with how tight the whole thing was. And it was like just enough sloppy to feel real, which I thought was like pretty cool and surprising. I expected canned demos, and that was not a canned demo anyway.
Yeah. And you can even see Greg Brockman's face as he's demoing and something starts to go a little bit wrong. But to your point, I also found the charm of it. But I think it's important because with a lot of companies, they were talking a lot about AI, but then you became suspicious of what's real versus what's not. And then to see them actually doing it, it makes it very real and it makes you start to understand it. And I think especially for the material they showed, you have to experience it in real time. Otherwise, you don't quite see the magic. So like one of the features that they had in this like world of being able to use AI on conversations, it's really interesting that it responds pretty quickly. Like it matters a lot if you're able to get it a response in 800 milliseconds or in 300 milliseconds, so the way that people talk. If you ask me a question or the old school satellite where it takes me like 2 seconds to respond, it's not a good conversation. And so I think by showing that in real time, you start to see, oh my gosh, this is actually real in a way that you can start to then imagine the possibilities of how you could improve products overall, or how you could build new things, or how you could just use this in your day-to-day life.
Yeah, I think that's an astute observation too, that in the phase of AI, there's a lot of overpromising that people are doing. I think Google took some heat for this for some of their previous multimodal demos from a couple months ago, where it turned out they cut the video. Like it did all the things, but some of it was a little like cheaty demo stuff. Some of it was cut video. Some of it was really polished to make it look like 10x more magical than it should. It's pretty magical, but it looked 10x more magical. And something I loved about the OpenAI is like, I feel like they are trying not to get too deep in the hype of AI is perfect and will solve all problems and take away all the things that you ever have to do, and more focusing on it's a real thing that's still like sometimes hard to use, that you have to play with, but it's still really cool. Like it's an under promise, over deliver type experience versus the reverse, which I think, man, especially in AI pitches are like, here's this one perfect demo that works exactly right. And then you go to use the product and it's not quite there. And I always feel like ChatGPT meets my expectations in a way that sometimes other products don't. And I thought they had the charm of that in the demo.
I agree. When you sit down and build products on top of the new generative AI, there's like a weirdly different approach to building products that you start to learn, which is that for most of my career, you were always in the stage where it took you a long time of building stuff and like sitting down and figuring things out and exploring all the edges before you got to something that you would ever demo, that would ever work, that would ever actually be ready. But interestingly, with generative AI, you can get quickly to something that's pretty good. So then you almost, if you're not careful, you fool yourselves, you're like people who are stakeholders, oh, you're almost done. But in reality, a lot of the work is to solve the last little bits of problems. And so this makes it way into demos because some people, because of all the pressures of products in life, they might be like, look at this, it worked great. And then you implicitly have to wonder, for that one example of that one thing you showed me, or is it actually going to work consistently across the board? And then there's definitely a world of like art of the possible. And I think that it's important to show with AI because it's hard to understand what's possible. But then there's also the idea of showing something that actually works and works well. You start to see it with things like you're saying, which if they're demoing it in real time live, then they must believe in it because that's like a big stage for it.
Yeah. Anything you were hoping to see from them that you didn't get, especially as a builder? I think this was not what I expected, but very cool, which is also a fun thing. I wonder if it's a purposeful curveball on some level.
We've gotten used to this idea that these models just keep getting better. And it's interesting and funny. We're almost like assuming the rate of progress. And so like when ChatGPT or GPT-3 first came out, it was like amazing. And then you're like, oh, but it's not as good at this. And then GPT 3.5 came out, it was faster and better and cheaper. And then you're like that. And then GPT-4 came out, and each of them is like weirdly like these like major steps above each in terms of their capabilities, their ability to reason, their ability to understand what you want, keep track of things, and all these different like kind of benchmarks or just things you want to use it for. And so like in a weird way, every time somebody does an announcement, you just expect them to like go to the top of the like, the ELO leaderboard. They're now the new best model. And in some ways, or in GPT-4 is definitely in the spectrum. And GPT-4 Omni is probably, if not the best, one of the best models out there. But it wasn't GPT 4.5 and it wasn't GPT-5. And so it wasn't like a step function difference with the new generation. It was a step function difference in the omni-channel approach that they touted, but this solves all of the challenges you might have experienced with AI before, just from a model quality perspective.
Yeah. I thought the other piece that I was surprised by was that they really leaned in on making the consumer product of ChatGPT with this Omni model much more powerful and freer, which I was surprised by. I think was a decision that I would not have guessed. I suspect they have a ton of revenue from GPT Pro, whatever they call it, users. Yeah. They also obviously have companies like yours that are larger organizations integrating this. You get a lot of advice that like you should either be a B2B company or a B2C company. It's hard to be both. And they seem to be committed to running the everything strategy, which I personally was like, wow, they're leaning in on consumer, which I was surprised by.
Yeah, it is very interesting because like, to your point, like being able to be successful in a B2B versus B2C world is just very different, just the requirements that you typically have. But then also there's the dynamic of they're simultaneously a platform company who provides to you the tools in addition to using it themselves, right? And so it's not just to have one product that they give to end users and then ChatGPT for enterprise, which they have, but then also they have this huge business of providing the APIs for people like us to use or via Azure and other places. Now, I think they can get away with it for what's worth based on what you said earlier, which is this idea of they're pretty focused. Even though they have these different ways by which they push it out, their job in life is to have AI respond to these inputs in these different ways. And so I think that might be how they're getting away with this very broad scope. But then also what they've done very well is they take the long view. They think about it in terms of one day we're going to have GPT-7 and 8, 9, or those kind of equivalents. And so we want to just be always marching towards that. We don't need to stop along the way to like normal traditional business concerns about how to profit and so on. They just seem to constantly, like just to the point, they keep lowering their prices and they're just always the leaders on that part.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Like when I step back and try to take like a product strategy lens to OpenAI, at first glance, it looks nuts. We have a free consumer business. We have a consumer subscription business. We have all these different models. We have a research arm. We have a developer platform. We have an enterprise version of the consumer product. We have an enterprise developer platform business. It's 5 things. It like defies all of the focus like things. Now, number one, best funded company of all time, obviously possible, but then they also do it with a relatively small team for the amount of usage and research and core stuff they're doing. And I like your perspective that it's yes, but at the end of the day, what they're doing is commercializing and driving adoption of models, right? That's the core business. Everything else is just a piece off of that. And the more I think about it, the more I'm like, oh, this is actually really smart because their willingness to commercialize in all those ways, I think gives them a moat that is hard for other people to replicate. Because when you think AI, I think for most people, ChatGPT is like Kleenex. It's not, oh, there's generative AI. For most people, it's ChatGPT, and that's because they have this consumer product. My kids use it for school.
Yeah.
They don't know about Llama. They don't know about Gemini. They just know ChatGPT, right? Which means when you're a developer, what's the first API you're going to try? Is, oh, GPT-5. It has the same name as ChatGPT. And when you're an enterprise company, you're like, oh my God, 400 of my employees already have paid ChatGPT accounts. Let me roll that up.
Yeah.
It's just like a lot of businesses in one, but they do all connect the dots with each other, right?
Yeah.
Which I honestly, as a person who's I worked at Slack for a long time, like you guys at Box, we had a self-service business and an enterprise business, and the tension of those two, even though it's only one product, is really high.
Yeah.
Imagining doing that across all of these different segments is just, it's a really hard strategy to run. I think one that only they can do, maybe Google as well. But it's impressive.
Think maybe, yeah, like to your point, like they probably will have to deal with some of the challenges that come up in all these cases. But it also, when you have a platform shift, like this may be like one of those times where some of the normal rules don't apply, because like this is a very generalized technology that, and then you could look at a lot of examples of other people who like these rules were, see this company that failed or struggled in this area. Like it may not apply to them right now because of just the moment we're in with technology evolution and everything else.
Yeah, super interesting. Let's talk about Google a little bit, because I think just visually and experientially, totally different approach to AI in some respects versus we pitched and demoed one product experience with a couple of different use cases to Gemini and everything. What stood out to you at I/O?
I think you've highlighted it well, is that there's this kind of distinction between like, where will AI be useful to people? And there is the argument, like OpenAI just illustrated very well, which is that at some point, people just want to chat. They want to talk. They want to just interact the way that people interact. And I think that OpenAI is clearly one of the leaders in this philosophy. Now, the other side of it is that, and this is a Box, is what one of the things we think about, is that we want to make AI help you with things that you normally do. Like at some point, like you might, I don't know if you've all experienced it, you maybe don't want to just type in words, everything you care about. At some point you click and just like you have some really good experiences. Like people have built really good products and experiences around things you care about in ways that don't make you have to describe what you want. And then arguably people want those interfaces. So I think with Google's approach, you saw that they just started to incorporate AI into things you care about. And I think it's important because even though we're all in the middle of this AI is changing, is so awesome, this great new technology, like at the end of the day, the technology is a tool to accomplish something. It's to add value. And usually the AI by itself doesn't do that. So then with Google, you saw how AI can add value to search, how it can add value to the way that you experience your email. It's just all like almost this like long list. But at the end of the day, if you didn't have AI as a word, then you would say, wow, Google just made a lot of their products better. And I think that is important. So, and for us at Box, that's our philosophy. Like we do unstructured content. We store, we manage, we help you collaborate, we protect all these things. And AI can help you in 10 different ways. And the fact that AI matters because you want to learn about it. It's possible now that wasn't possible before. But it is, at the end of the day, our job is to help you as an enterprise handle some of the most valuable content that you have, and then do that with every feature you can imagine. And so I think that there's that philosophy difference that you're seeing emerge, which is it a chat box or is it incorporated in everything that I naturally do?
OpenAI has the luxury as a relatively new company and product. So hard to remember, but ChatGPT, a year and a half old. Before that, they were just a research company, right? In a lot of ways, is that they can focus on a single touch point for their product experiences. So it's okay. The entry point is we have an API and we have a chat box, and we can really focus the experience around those two things. Whereas Google obviously has one of the largest suites of products in the world. And so their approach is, yeah, let's add AI to everything. One thing I worry about is, does it feel like a cohesive strategy? Like if there's AI in Gmail, there's AI in Google Photos, there's AI in Maps, there's AI in Search. I'm still like trying to wrap my head around what it all means for Google. Yeah. But I think what they're saying is we can just improve everything we do with this technology, and we're leaning into doing that. Versus there's a new experience we're driving around this. And I think some of their organizational changes and stuff around Gemini, making it like centralized and then distributed to each of the products, I think is starting to show in the way they're launching at I/O. Impressive. They at least announced a lot of stuff. We'll see how much of it, when it ships and when it gets out there. But yeah.
there's an interesting piece. So if you've lived through these platform shifts, like many of us have in the last 10, 20 years, mobile was a big deal. You used to not carry around these like fantastic devices, and now they're everywhere. Like cloud. Like it used to be that if you wanted something, you got to install it all yourself and deal with that all the complications. And as these shifts went by, you start to see people, we're mobile first, we're cloud first, we have a cloud strategy, a mobile strategy. And like today, even though those things are incredibly valuable, you don't hear many companies today being like, the reason you should buy us is because we have a mobile app. Like you expect, everybody does that. And so I think there's a world where as AI evolves, as you get used to it, we're going to maybe use the word AI less because it's just part of everything that we do. And I actually see that even in my day-to-day life. Like my kids, I'll be interested. So there's the commonly referenced movie, Her, which was science fiction until now. And I bet you if I show my kids this movie later, they'd be, what's the big deal? And then you almost like,
story.
Yeah. Like you don't understand when I grew up or even 2 years ago, like this wasn't possible. Yeah, but now it is. It's just like many other things that I experienced in life and technology. So I do believe there's a little bit of element of this, which is like the AI strategy is critical right now, but not because it's AI, but because things are changing so much. And because this is a new capability and kind of in the midst of this big platform shift. And therefore you want to know what companies are doing in this area, as opposed to the fact that it's AI being the most important thing. So I do think that Google, they're incorporating it in all these different ways, that they have to be more broad because they do so much more, like you said.
The things I'm most interested in or excited about is one, the integration of AI overviews into search. Bold move on their part in some respects, just because of how much of the internet is driven through Google search, how much of it drives publisher traffic. I think there's a lot of interesting questions there I want to dig into. So that one is one. And actually, I'm like surprised they went so hard on it. And then the other is some of the automation stuff in email. I thought was like cool demo, but I worry it might not exactly work. They showed some stuff around, get all my receipts and make a spreadsheet, which by the way, sounds awesome. But I think the tricky thing is like, how do you convince someone who's always imagined that was not possible to go to that thing and do that? And how many of those use cases really are there? So it'll be really interesting to see how strongly it's surfaced, how integrated it is. It feels like an add-on still. Oh, if you need to do something fancy in email or workspace, go over here and do this thing versus a core experience. But honestly, your analogy of mobile apps makes a lot of sense. It's how mobile apps felt. It was like, I bet when, I don't remember it that well, but I bet they were like, we're making an app for maps and an app for search and an app for places and an app for everything. And you're like, wow, that seems unfocused. But honestly, now I use Google Maps all the time. You don't know which one's going to win.
Yeah. And I think in that same sort of a thought process, it's like back in the day, we'd have all these big debates. It'd be like, well, is it a web page or an app? And why do you need an app? And like all these different things.
A mega app or lots of apps. There were so many of them, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And it doesn't quite matter as long as you do it really well. Like I use plenty of websites today that are great. And then I use a lot of apps that I like slightly better in different ways. But hitting on your search topic for a minute, I think this is really critical. I think people maybe like when AI, like you remember like a year or whatever it was ago, and Bing came out and Bing did AI results, right? And that was one of their initial things that they put it forth. And I think in many ways you looked at it like that's some really amazing technology. But then I give Google credit for the idea that they had been able to basically give you the little answers boxes for a long time. And in many cases, I don't know, as you play with the Google search, which there was early access, so we've been looking at it for a while, but it gives you like the generative answer and also like answers for just what it knew. And in some cases, you don't even have to wait for the generation because it already told you the thing you wanted. And it's been pretty good at that, in my opinion. So to me, the interesting part of this technology is a little bit more on the enterprise side for what it's worth, which is that like with Google, you have this interesting world where they have a lot of data about a lot of websites and everybody can like visit those. And so they're able to really tailor their results. Compared to every enterprise company in the world where like for Box, like everybody has different content. They have permissions. They have my content and then we share stuff, but it's like nothing's like the same. And so you don't have signals about like popularity, like PageRank, the way that like kind of Google like innovated in. And so, but one of the cool things about AI today is that you can start to get these enterprise class features to help you understand your corpus of data. And for me, like when you see it in Google or in Bing, that's great. But then it's one of my jobs is to start to imagine that will be really great when you see it on your enterprise content because their enterprise search has been something for a very long time that many companies have not been able to do very well for all sorts of reasons, like the one I mentioned. But then now with AI, what can you do to help that? Can you actually start to ask questions of a group of your data and get back an answer that is legitimate and cited and so on? And to me, that's kind of features that we work on. But those are the really interesting things that go a little bit above and beyond this like other consumer-based searches in the world. I think that's an important angle. Now, to your other topic, the way we think about it is this idea of, with AI, what can it do? And this is really critical in the product process to me, as there's always like the product people who are like, can we maybe do this? And then there's the engineers who are like, this is only possible now. And you just typically find yourself building the thing that's where these two meet. But then that whole thought process is completely thrown upside down right now, because things are now possible that weren't before. And you just get used to it in your career to be like, yeah, I don't think about those things. They're not possible. Like, let's focus on something that looks like something else we've done. Yeah. But now you have to step back. Like, even after yesterday, you have to step back. Like, I woke up at 3 a.m. this morning with some new idea about how we could use some of these new, like, kind of multimodality capabilities to offer some really cool features. And that doesn't happen often, like where you are confronted with a new technology reality. And so for me, as you're thinking about this, you start to think about a mental model to help you is like agents, or this idea of AI being an assistant to you. And then I hate to anthropomorphize too much AI because it's not quite how it works, but I think it helps a lot. You think of it as like the way a person thinks, sort of mimic that. And so then if you start to think, what would help you in this case? And then you start to think about, oh yeah, maybe I will put like assistants that are integrated into my, and then help look at things and help me ask them questions and help in my overall experience. So I do think that maybe, like you said, today, there's certainly user experience polish. There's certainly like common ways of working. Companies have to invent because this didn't really exist before. But I think that those kind of things where you have like more integrated agents assisting you in real time in what you're doing, I think that's something that is really could be valuable. And it almost starts to give the promise of enterprise value or business value in those kind of class of problems and related to you doing work.
Yeah, I'm going to riff on this for a second. And it's something I hadn't really thought of. And I don't know is exactly what you were saying, but is underneath it. I think a lot of the last decade or so of product development has not been about what can the technology do. And so a lot of product management processes, a lot of how we do ideation, how we think about solving customer problems has all gone from customer down, if that makes sense. It's what is the customer problem? How should we solve it? How should we implement it? Is there a business for it? Like a lot of lean startup methodology, a lot of customer discovery. It's really customer down. And a lot of that was a reaction to, I think, people doing interesting technology that nobody wanted to use. But we're back. I haven't worked on something that was maybe technically impossible, but we were going to try to make it work since I spent my early career at Pixar working on 3D animation. And so it was always about connecting the dots. Yeah. What can we actually do with the rendering tech we have today and the computing speed? And what does the director want to put on the screen? And it's really hard to connect the dots. And all of a sudden in AI, we do have this bottoms up, like true bottoms up innovation, which is one, nobody's really sure what it can do and what it can't do. And then a whole bunch of stuff that was fantasy land. Like my joke for the last decade has been personalization in AI is always 4 quarters out in the roadmap because it always moves. It's always in the future. And now it's in the here. And all of a sudden it's like how you build has got to be totally different. My suspicion is I don't know a lot about how OpenAI works internally, but I bet there's a whole process of, hey, we made this thing and it does some cool stuff that we never could do before. Let's figure out how to productize it, which is the opposite of the way we've built products for 2 decades now, close to at least most of my career.
It is definitely like I've probably read 30 research papers in the last 2 years or even in the last like few months. And I didn't do that normally in my job as to build products because AI researchers are coming up with these capabilities. And like researchers aren't typically the ones on the forefront of there's usually like a long like cycle in there. And to your point, you listen to the interviews of the people who built the models, I don't think that they'll tell you they weren't quite sure what it would do. And in some cases, they were very surprised by some of the things that they were capable.
Yeah.
And I think you see it from the data, which is that as you make them more and more complex, they had these jumps in like all of a sudden it got a lot better. You're like, oh, it's getting a little bit better, but it has this exponential trend where all of a sudden it's wow. Like by adding more parameters and making the models like use this new technique, all of a sudden it attained like a whole new world. If you've ever saw GPT-2, you were like, that's cool. That's neat. That seems like there's something there. And then compared to ChatGPT, then there was this moment where it became very good. And in a weird way, we haven't gotten out of that. These new things that are coming out are in some cases brand new research that like was not possible again, like before. And that's just a rare time. And so I do think that the thing you mentioned, you used to do these exercises of your product or like building stuff where you're like, let's just do a full ideation. Let's get in the habit of like design thinking. And then one of the things they make you do is imagine something, and it doesn't have to be possible. What's the best toaster or whatever? And it's just to free your mind for a moment to be like, oh, I'm going to think of things not constrained. And then that helps you a lot. And weirdly, it doesn't make sense in reality to always do that because you waste your own time with things that aren't possible. But if now you're like, if you imagine something, you should double check it and be like, yeah, can this work? Or things that you tried in the past and didn't work, you should try again in some cases because of this idea of maybe it's better now. Even something you tried 6 months ago for AI, you probably might check it again. And this, I think, goes to one of the key things is that nobody quite knows how good it's going to be at anything it does. So then you have to have it in like, not only the researchers, the people who build the platform, or the people who build the products like we do, and we make tailor to these features to provide people like our enterprise class content AI, but also the people using it. Like at some point, adding structured data about your unstructured data or asking questions to a group of documents and doing this kind of like approach where you're gathering insights. You should try it on your stuff to see how well it does for what you really care about. And if you don't do that, you probably don't know. And so this is one of the things we tell people is probably want to get started seeing how the AI does. And then I'm almost certainly going to evolve. And it's really good today, but you should just, if you don't get started, you will never be able to separate out what's possible in your world versus where the value is.
Yeah. So, and the hardest part of this is I think it's also easy to overpromise. I got really excited about baby AGI and some of these agent models super early and was playing around with them and was like, I love this idea. I love this concept. It'll do some planning. And it just didn't really work. And then I was like, okay, GPT-4 is out. I'm going to pay for GPT-4 so I can try it with GPT-4. And it worked a little better, but still didn't quite work. And the trouble with this is how do you find that sweet spot, especially as let's say you're a product manager at a relatively established company. How do you think about product thinking in a world where you're like, not just figuring out what's possible today, but in an unpredictable world? 4.0 is different than most people thought it would be, right? Than 4. And so it has nuance. It's not like Moore's Law where you can just be like, it is cheaper, it is faster, but it's not obviously a CPU is a CPU and it's just going to be the same exact thing, but faster. So if it's too slow today, it'll be faster tomorrow. It's a little bit more complex than that. And I'm curious what feedback you give your product leaders, your technologists, et cetera, to help find the right middle ground that's not too, it'll just get usurped by general model, but also forward thinking enough in a world where it's fuzzy what these products can do. It seems like a complicated problem.
Yeah. Philosophy wise, I think there's different angles to it, but you sit down to try this stuff. So first of all, I'll always be like trying to keep up and try the new technologies. And I think that's a big key to it. But then also, so what we do at Box and my philosophical advice is think first about a platform that will harness the powers so that you can then deploy them in ways for your information. So for us at Box, we have an AI platform, and like we call it that internally. And this is where you take content from like our customers and how you then give them the capability to use AI on it. And we think that way, and we talk that way, and then we talk in an AI terminology. And then some of our teams are like, I'm going to use that to do this thing today. I'm going to use the text generation capabilities. I'm going to use the capabilities, the classification capabilities, the Q&A, the question answer, or the generative. And then that way, if a new capability comes along, like in this case, now we can do it on images and audio. We then update our platform, and then people internally don't have to keep track. Even our customers don't have to keep track of every AI advancement because we've extracted the power of AI for our use case. And then again, we're enterprise content. How do we safely and securely do that? And so then we have a little mini version inside of our company where we say, hey, I have an idea. I think that for this particular product, this subpart of this feature of Box, wouldn't it be great if you had this AI capability? And then they're like, sure. Just inside of Box, we use our platform, and it's safe and it's secure and it's compliant and it respects privacy and respects control and our AI principles that our enterprise customers must have. And so we basically solve a whole set of problems internally so that we then do our best to expose it to everybody in the company so they get to use it. And that sometimes is an overly complex approach. You don't want to build too many platforms you don't need to. But in the case of something that's rapidly changing, something that has a lot of concerns associated with it, again, like enterprises really are excited about AI, but they're also scared in some ways about some of the challenges. And so we systematize this so that we can then provide those kind of capabilities. And I think I give that advice to anybody who has one of these multiple ways you might use the AI capabilities, and then also want to take advantage of the newer next things that come out in the next day.
Super interesting. And again, like counterintuitive to normal product thinking, which is get like a small team, let them do whatever they want. Don't platformize early. Don't premature optimization is the root of all evil. But I think in some respects here, I think it sounds like what you're betting on is we're going to use this. We're going to use it everywhere across the organization in a bunch of different ways. And the underlying systems are going to change a lot, and we're going to want to be resilient to that. And we don't want our product teams necessarily to have to think too deeply about it. And I think if you take those three things together, this platform type approach makes a ton of sense all of a sudden, even though it's at first glance counterintuitive.
Yeah. And I'll highlight my bias. I am the CTO who loves platforms. And then also I deal with enterprises. And then in the enterprises we talk to, we have over 100,000 enterprise customers, and they have a lot of concerns. And if we are not handling every one of them, then they just can't use AI. They have their own regulations. They have their own challenges, their own like things that they needed to comply with. And we need to be able to provide that all to them. And so the best way to do that is to systematically solve those and then keep open the idea of innovation on top of that so that you don't get locked out of this kind of balance, as you said, the distinction between premature optimization and the distinction between just letting the exploration happen, which then leads to that kind of innovation you're talking about.
Yeah, I think that's great advice for product teams and product builders on how to think about these capabilities. The next thing that comes to mind for me is at Slack, we started out looking a lot like a consumer company. We shipped stuff when we wanted to, or we had big announcements and nobody knew they were coming, like this kind of thing. And over time, as we had more enterprise customers, we had to learn how to build enterprise software, right? Which was, don't surprise people. They need a lot of visibility into what's coming. They need to be able to opt into things. Maybe you have to pilot stuff. You have to prep your sales and success, like all these sorts of things. And I'm curious, this pace of innovation, how do you think about the balance of innovation, experimentation, and roadmap predictability and go-to-market predictability on the other side?
Yeah. Not everybody realizes the challenges of a product person or an engineering team who has to deal with the consumer and the consumer challenges versus the enterprise and enterprise challenges, or in many cases, or in some cases, like Slack, both, or like Box. Yeah. Because like the traditional way for like consumer-based companies is like usage is king. If they're not using it, then they don't exist. And then you look at the numbers and you just see everything. And you have to do that in enterprise too, because we, like at Box, we really care. Is the user having a great experience? Same as Slack, right? Yeah. But then at the same time, like you have to worry about the people who run the thing, the IT teams, the people who manage, they have this like responsibility to understand, to secure, to manage their content. And so we have to deliver both. And there's organizational ways you do with it. There's product and ways you do with it and so on. But to your point, at this very moment, it goes to this challenge of our enterprise customers typically demand, like if something changes, they have the ability to control that, be able to turn on and off certain things. And similarly, they want to know the roadmap down the road. They like, we need to have time to think about this and then understand like what might happen. And it's very sensitive. Like, it's very valuable content that everybody uses.
I need to update all my internal documentation, and I have to change my training because Box is in my new employee onboarding. There's so many different things, right? Yeah. You can't just change the login screen, it turns out, because somebody has it in a doc somewhere. Or in the future, an AI automation that depends on it. It's going to be harder and harder, I think.
and not to mention like the idea of like people are openly like, so we have these like AI principles. So this is one way we've handled it, is that early on we published this is how we're going to handle AI. And in some cases it's different from the way that other things work. So one of the principles is that the enterprise is in full control of their content and then of the AI. So normally if we have a new feature, we release to our customers and we say, here you go. And then we release to the users and they get a chance to try it. Just all normally good SaaS software. So it's like a benefit. It's a feature of this approach, which is that everybody gets to use it. But in the case of AI, even when we release it, we tell the admins to then go enable it for their users. And we give them a chance to try it first. We don't just enable it for all their users, because in this time of rapid change and how it works and all these concerns, and is it hallucinating? Is there regulations happening? Is there compliance policies? How do you audit it? What's training? How does that work? If they're not comfortable with all that, then they might just stop. They would not use Box. And this is our obligation as an enterprise grade company to be able to do that. So this is actually principle number one for us, is the customer. And so that really helps. And it's something that we don't do for other products because like they're not as scary to customers. So that approach is important. And then the other thing we do is that we secure the platform. And so we basically go to customers and we explain the capabilities of the platform, the security, compliance, contractual obligations of the platform. And then we say, once you figure this out, it works the same way for everything you do. And that's partly that strategy, which is to help them understand, oh, I see. even though I see in this, there's a feature here where you can ask a question of a group of documents, there's a feature here where it generates content, there's a feature over here where it extracts metadata and all these like things that we build, they say, I'm going to approve the platform and then let my people use it. So it's almost like one more layer of abstraction above what we do internally, or what like OpenAI has given us, is that we are providing these capabilities and features to our customers to use.
And then you still roadmap and announce and launch things the same way. Maybe there's lots of internal innovation happening, but because of these principles, it sounds like you're not throwing a new thing at the wall. You might do some testing around it and then still put it as part of your sort of enterprise go-to-market and announcements process for you.
I think like many companies today, we have explored the different ways by which we provide things out. Like traditionally you do betas and then, so there's the starting betas and then the beta of the capability and the beta of the final feature and so on. And so we have mechanisms in Box to like, we have a lot of customers, right? So we're able to talk to them, and if they're interested, they help us design stuff, and then we enable it for groups of content, for groups of people. And so we have a little bit more of the almost like startup-like approach where you get these trusted customers early to build things. And then we start to talk to more customers about it. And then we have this ongoing. So you'll hear us talk and for Box and public and different places about the kind of capabilities we're looking at, the features we're talking about. But then at some point we do the natural enterprise thing where we're like, on this date at this time, you'll see it come out in beta. And on this date at this time, you'll see it come out in GA form. And those are very important dates to us. For the point you made is like enterprises require that kind of, like they want the visibility. So then we're able to then go through and basically say, talk about a lot of great stuff. And you see Aaron do this all the time. And in addition to this sort of specific delivery of that specific feature.
Thanks for listening to part 1 of our episode with Ben Kus, the CTO of Box. We ended on a little bit of a cliffhanger, and part 2 really dives into the details. Ben is a great technologist and has a lot of interesting thoughts about the capabilities of AI. But in part 2, we don't just dive into the high level. We talk about the specific nuts and bolts of what it's meant for Box to build AI products in the enterprise. We talk about how they build, how they iterate, and how they test and evaluate different model capabilities to bring value to their customers. And in the meantime, talk about what we think the future of AI building might look like. Stay tuned for part 2 coming in a few days.